You old hag, you remember this night? You say one more word and you'll be sleeping in a dumpster. My daughter-in-law's scream still rings in my ears, sharper and colder than the November rain that was lashing against my skin. That's right. I had just been thrown out of the car by my own son and his wife, left to stand alone on the side of a highway in the middle of a storm. My name is Rosemary, and I'm a 72-year-old widow from Cleveland, Ohio. I gave my son everything, only to be treated like yesterday's garbage when my old-fashioned love wasn't scientific enough for their perfect little family. Come, walk with me on this journey of rediscovery. If you find a piece of yourself in my words, I hope you'll follow along for more stories of inspiration and strength. And please, share your own story in the comments section. Your voice matters. You are not alone. They say time heals all wounds. What a sweet little lie we tell ourselves to get through the dark days. I'm 72 years old now, sitting here in my small, sun-drenched garden in Asheville, and I can tell you one thing for sure: time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to live with the scars. It sands down the sharp edges of the pain until they don't tear you open every time you accidentally brush up against them. But they're still there, always. Like a roadmap etched deep into your skin, telling the story of where you've been and who you've become. There are scars I cherish, like the faint one on my lower belly, a reminder of the day I brought my Kevin into this world. But there are invisible scars too, and the deepest, most painful one was carved into my soul on a stormy November night 3 years ago. That was the night I died for the first time. The rain whipped against my face like tiny leather lashes, cold and merciless. I stood shivering on the soaked patch of grass on the shoulder of Interstate 90, just outside of Cleveland. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and the tangy scent of mud. The taillights of that familiar black SUV, the one I'd chipped in my retirement savings for them to buy, faded into the white sheet of rain, like two bleeding wounds slowly dissolving into the darkness. My left cheek was on fire, a throbbing heat that spread all the way to my ear. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in my mouth where the corner of my lip had split. My knee screamed with a sharp shooting pain from the fall when I was shoved out of the car, hitting the cold concrete hard. But that physical pain was nothing at all, compared to the hurricane raging inside my chest. My heart, it didn't just break, it was ripped to shreds. You old hag, you remember this night. You say one more word and you'll be sleeping in a dumpster. Linda's voice, my daughter-in-law's, was sharp as a razor blade, echoing in my head, repeating over and over like a curse. It mixed with the drumming of the rain, the whistling of the wind, and the roar of semi-trucks barreling past, spraying plumes of dirty, ice-cold water all over me. For a moment, I felt completely invisible. A 69-year-old woman, soaked to the bone, abandoned on the side of a busy highway, yet utterly and completely alone. How on earth did it come to this? The question drilled into my mind, pulling me back to just a few hours earlier, to a day that was supposed to be filled with laughter and joy. It was my precious grandson Sam's 6th birthday. Ever since my husband George passed away 5 years prior, Kevin's little family had become my whole world. Sam was my sunshine, the reason I got up in the morning. So, I'd been up since 5, when the Cleveland sky was still a dull, gloomy gray, to prepare his special gift. Not one of the expensive toys he had dozens of, but something only Grandma could make. A pot of beef and potato stew, slow-cooked for 6 hours until every piece of meat was falling, apart tender, fragrant with rosemary and garlic. On the side, a bowl of mashed potatoes, creamy as silk, with plenty of butter and a touch of heavy cream. It was Sam's favorite meal in the whole wide world. I carefully packed it all into thermal containers and wrapped them in an old wool blanket. The trip to Kevin's house wasn't easy. I had to take 2 different buses, a nearly 2-hour journey, clutching that precious basket of food on my lap the entire time. I could have called Kevin, but I didn't want to be a bother. Their lives were busy enough as it was. When I rang the doorbell, Kevin answered. My son, the boy I had poured every ounce of my love into raising, was now a 45-year-old man with worried lines etched around his eyes. Mom, why'd you take the bus again? I told you we would have picked you up, he said, a hint of reproach in his voice. Then his eyes fell to the basket in my hands. The smile on his face faded, replaced by an almost imperceptible frown. "You brought food again, Mom. The fridge is already packed full." I tried to force a smile, though a little pang of hurt went through me. "But it's Sam's favorite. Besides, doing this makes me feel useful." Just then, Linda emerged from the bedroom. My daughter-in-law is a smart, sharp woman, a successful project manager. But when she saw the food basket, her perfectly painted lips tightened into a thin, hard line. It was a look I knew all too well, the sign of her disapproval. "Mother," she began, her voice soft but laced with criticism. "We're trying to implement a scientific dietary plan for Sam. All the butter and salt in your cooking really isn't good for his development." Every word she spoke was like a tiny needle poking at my heart, but I kept the smile plastered on my face, a smile I'd practiced for years, a mask to hide the hurt. "Oh, come on now. What's a little treat every now and then?" Right on cue, Sam came running out of his room shouting, "Grandma!" He threw himself around my legs in a tight hug. "Grandma, I want the stew." Linda immediately pulled him back. "Sam, go wash your hands first," she commanded, then lowered her voice, just enough for me to hear. "Mother, please, don't always spoil him like this." I opened my mouth to say something, but then I closed it. This wasn't the first time. Ever since Sam was born, our clashes over parenting philosophies had become more and more frequent. She read dozens of books on gentle parenting and positive discipline, while I, an old-fashioned grandma, just thought a child needed love, a warm, home-cooked meal, and a thicker sweater when it got cold. The birthday dinner was at a fancy restaurant downtown. Just looking at the prices on the menu made my stomach clench. One meal here cost more than my entire week's grocery budget. Throughout the dinner, Sam was glued to his tablet, watching cartoons non-stop, while Linda and Kevin occasionally spooned a bite of food into his mouth. I wanted to say that watching a screen while eating was bad for his digestion, but remembering our exchange from earlier, I forced myself to swallow the words. The dinner passed in a cloud of awkwardness and distance. We felt more like strangers sharing a table than a family. On the way home, it started to rain. I was in the back seat with Sam, who had fallen asleep next to me. Soft music played from the speakers while Kevin and Linda whispered about something up front. Watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked window, I found myself drifting back to Kevin's own childhood. We were poor back then. On his birthday, the best I could do was fry an extra egg for his bowl of noodles. But he would eat that bowl with such pure, unadulterated joy, slurping up every last drop of broth and grinning at me from ear to ear. Where did that child go? The son who always held an umbrella for me in the rain, who stayed up all night by my bedside when I was sick, where had he disappeared to? "What are you thinking about now, Mom?" Linda's voice pulled me back to the present. "Just looking at how peacefully Sam is sleeping," I murmured. Linda glanced in the rearview mirror. "That's because you spoil him. Now he can't fall asleep unless someone is right there next to him." That was the straw that broke the camel's back. The exhaustion and the hurt that had been building up all day finally erupted. "It's perfectly normal for a child to need to feel secure," I snapped, my voice probably a little louder than I intended. "When Kevin was little, he also—" "Here we go again." Linda cut me off, her voice rising with irritation. "Could you please stop forcing your outdated ideas onto our lives? Times have changed." "Mom," Kevin chimed in, defending his wife. "Linda has done a lot of research on child psychology. You should just listen to her." A wave of indignation washed over me. You were just what?" Linda twisted around in her seat, her eyes flashing in the dim light of the car. "You were just thinking we don't know how to raise our own child, weren't you? Do you know what Sam's piano teacher said? That he has trouble concentrating. It's because you're always feeding him that junk." "How is my food junk?" My voice started to tremble. "When Kevin was a boy, Shut up." Kevin's shout was like a thunderclap inside the car. The vehicle swerved violently before he corrected it. "It's always when Kevin was a boy. When Kevin was a boy. Are you ever going to stop?" I was stunned into silence. In his entire life, not once, not ever had Kevin screamed at me like that. Tears started to well up in my eyes, hot and bitter. I was just... "Oh, now what are the waterworks for?" Linda scoffed. "Every time you can't win an argument, you resort to tears. Who are you trying to play the victim for?" The shouting had woken Sam up, and he started to wail. Linda immediately turned to soothe him, muttering, "See, Now you've woken him up." Kevin slammed on the brakes, pulling the car onto the emergency shoulder. It all happened so fast. Before I could process anything, he turned around. The headlights of an oncoming car illuminated him, and in that split second, I saw his hand swing through the air. Crack. A dry, sharp sound echoed in the car. My world stopped. My left cheek burned. The physical pain was not 1/10 of the agony in my heart. "Mom, can you just give it a rest?" His face, lit by the passing headlights, was a stranger's. This wasn't my son. This was a monster. "You're always criticizing, always telling us what to do. We don't need you controlling our lives anymore." I clutched my stinging cheek, too shocked to speak. Was this the child whose hands I'd worked raw to provide for? The little boy who held my umbrella? Who stayed by my sickbed? "Get out," Kevin said. His voice was ice, devoid of all emotion. That sound was even more terrifying than his roar from moments before. What? My ears were ringing. I thought I must have misheard him over the sound of the rain and Sam's crying. "Kevin, what are you saying?" I said, "Get out," he repeated, each word a hammer blow to my chest. He didn't call me Mom anymore. "Get out and cool off." "No, Kevin, it's pouring out there. Mom will." I begged, my voice cracking. "I'll be quiet. I promise. Let's just go home, son." But he wasn't listening. His eyes were empty, blank. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a decisive click. The sound of that buckle releasing was like a judge's gavel coming down on a death sentence. He got out of the car, and the rain immediately plastered his hair to his emotionless face. He walked around to my side, without a moment's hesitation, and yanked the door wide open. A blast of cold wind and rain hit me. I stumbled out, my legs trembling as if they didn't belong to me. My thin wool dress was instantly soaked with freezing rainwater. Before I could even steady myself, Kevin reached back into the car, grabbed my purse, the very one he'd bought me for Mother's Day 2 years ago, and threw it into a filthy puddle next to me. With a sickening thump, I heard the faint tinkle of my compact mirror shattering inside. He slammed the door shut, a sharp, final sound that severed everything. I stood there, stunned, watching my son get back into the driver's seat. But the cruel little play wasn't over yet. Linda rolled down her window. Her face, illuminated by the car's interior light, was twisted in a look of pure, ugly triumph. "See?" she sneered, a smile I will never forget until the day I die. "You see? Even your own son can't stand you anymore. You're a burden, a nuisance." I stammered, trying to find my voice. "Linda, how could you?" "How could I what?" She cut me off, her voice hissing through her teeth. "I've had to put up with your outdated opinions and your unhealthy cooking for 6 years. 6 years. You filled my son's head with fairy tales and spoiled him rotten with your blind coddling. You don't belong in this world anymore." She looked me up and down, her eyes full of contempt. "Look at you, just pathetic." Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper, delivering the final, killing blow. "You old hag, you remember this night? You say one more word, and you'll be sleeping in a dumpster." And with that, she pushed the button to raise the window. The glass rose slowly, like a stage curtain falling, shutting away her vicious face and locking me out in my own world. A world of rain, of darkness, and of absolute betrayal. The car disappeared. The thick curtain of rain swallowed it whole, as if it had never been there at all. I was left alone, standing in the howling night. For a dazed moment, I kept hoping it was all just a bad dream, that Kevin would slam on the brakes, turn the car around, and come back for me. That he'd open the door, his face streaked with regretful tears, and say, "Mom, I'm so sorry, I don't know what got into me." But the darkness ahead remained absolute. There was only the roar of giant steel monsters hurtling past, their tires screaming on the wet pavement like demonic laughter. The cold began to seep deep into my bones. My thin coat, a Christmas gift from them last year, now felt as heavy as lead armor, offering no protection, only pulling me down. The rain was relentless, each cold drop a needle prick, piercing through my clothes, through my skin, and seeming to freeze my already shattered heart. I wrapped my arms around myself, but my own body heat seemed to have abandoned me, just like my family had. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. only that if I stood still I would die. From the cold, from a swerving car, or from utter despair. My feet felt like they were chained to stones. Every step was torture. The knee I'd banged up in the fall was now swollen and throbbed with every beat of my heart. My glasses were blurred by the rain, turning the glaring headlights of oncoming traffic into ghostly streaks of light. They sped past me, blind and indifferent. Every time a truck roared by, it threw a wall of filthy water on me, one humiliation after another. Not one person stopped. Not one person even slowed down. To them, I must have been just a shadow, an obstacle on the roadside, or worse, completely invisible. Had the world always been this cold? Or had I just been living in the warm, cozy bubble of a family's love? My purse was lying in the puddle. I bent down and picked it up, caked in mud. Inside, everything was soaked. The phone Kevin had taught me how to use was now just a dead black brick, completely useless. A laugh escaped my lips, a dry, hollow sound lost in the rain. How ironic. My only connection to the world, to the very people who had just thrown me away, was dead. I just kept walking. Time lost all meaning. There was only the night, the rain, and the endless pain. I wasn't crying anymore. My tears had either mingled with the rain or perhaps the pain had simply gone beyond the point of tears. My mind was a hollow void. The memories of Kevin as a little boy, of his warm hugs and loving words, they no longer brought me comfort. They had become knives, twisting in the wound. That little boy was dead. Or maybe he never really existed at all. Just a beautiful image I'd created to hold on to. After what felt like an eternity, through the misty curtain of rain, I saw a faint light in the distance, a blue sign with white letters, Resteria. A tiny spark of hope flickered within me, fragile but enough to urge my exhausted legs forward. It wasn't just a building, it was shelter. It was the promise of warmth and safety. I gritted my teeth, gathering every last bit of my strength to drag myself toward that light. Each step felt like walking on hot coals. My lungs burned, my head was spinning. Finally, as my feet hit the concrete sidewalk of the rest stop, my legs gave out from under me. I had to cling to a light pole just to stay upright. The neon light from the convenience store window spilled out, casting a strangely warm glow on my face. I took a deep breath, pushed open the glass door, and staggered inside. The sudden change was dizzying. The air inside was warm and dry. The fluorescent lights were blindingly bright. The smell of roasted coffee and sweet pastries hung in the air. It was a completely different world from the cold hell outside. A young woman was standing behind the cash register, in the middle of a wide yawn. When she saw me, her eyes shot open, the yawn swallowed back down. Her mouth hung open. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice filled with horror. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I must have looked like a nightmare. An old woman, soaked like a drowned rat, hair matted to her face, clothes caked in mud, with one side of her face swollen and bruised purple. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask for help, to explain, but no sound came out. The fever I had been fighting off during the long walk now erupted with a vengeance. My head throbbed, and the colorful rows of merchandise in front of me began to spin, blurring together. The black and white tiled floor suddenly tilted and rushed up to meet me. The last thing I heard was the young woman's terrified scream, and then everything went black. I woke up on a small cot, covered with a dry, warm wool blanket. The faint smell of antiseptic was in the air. Where was I? My soaking clothes had been replaced with a large, loose-fitting sweatsuit. My body ached all over, but at least I was dry and warm. A woman was sitting on a plastic chair next to the cot. She looked to be in her mid-50s, with a short, salt and pepper haircut. Her face was lined with a certain toughness, but her eyes held a tired kindness. Her hands were rough and capable, not the hands of an office worker. "You're awake," she said, her voice low and a little raspy. She handed me a cup of warm water. "You gave us quite a scare. Collapsed right in the middle of the store, burning up with a fever." I struggled to sit up. I felt like I had no strength left at all. "Thank you," I whispered. "Where am I?" "You're in the back room of the rest stop convenience store. I'm Patty, the night manager here," she said, supporting my back and adjusting the pillow. "We called for an ambulance, but the roads are bad with the storm. It might be a while before they can get here." I shook my head frantically. "No, No need for that. I'm fine. I tried to stand, but a wave of dizziness hit me, and I plopped back down. Patty gently pushed me back down. Don't you be stubborn. Lord knows how long you were out in that storm. You need to be checked out by a doctor. She hesitated for a moment, then looked me straight in the eye, a direct, no-nonsense gaze. How'd a woman like you end up walking the highway in this weather? That simple, direct question broke the last of my defenses. The tears started to fall again, but this time they weren't tears of despair, but of utter heartbreak. Maybe it was because Patty was a stranger, or maybe it was her practical concern, but I told her everything. The words tumbled out of me, jumbled and broken at first, then in an unstoppable flood. I told her about the stew, about Linda's criticisms, the cold birthday dinner, the argument in the car. When I got to the part where Kevin slapped me, Patty's mouth fell open, her eyes wide with disbelief. When I told her they had left me on the side of the road, she got so angry she slammed her hand down on the plastic table next to us, making the cup of water jump. And when I tremblingly repeated Linda's final curse, "You old hag, you remember this night. You say one more word, and you'll be sleeping in a dumpster." Patty's own eyes were red. "The bastards!" she seethed, grinding her teeth. "A bunch of ungrateful, good-for-nothing bastards." She shot up from her chair and paced the small room. "I've got a son. If he ever treated me like that, I swear to God I'd break both his legs." Her anger, strangely, was a comfort to me. It validated my pain, confirmed that what had happened to me was wrong. For the first time all night, I didn't feel so alone. I shook my head, a bitter smile on my lips. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have interfered so much in their lives." "Nonsense." Patty spun around, her voice sharp. "That's just the kind of excuse someone makes when they've been abused. You're his mother. You have every right to speak your mind. They needed you, so they were sweet as pie. Now they don't, so they kick you to the curb like an old piece of furniture. That's the truth of it." I was silent. She was right. Absolutely right. Ever since Sam was born, my role had changed. From a mother, I had become a nuisance. A meddling old woman trying to poison their precious child with outdated ideas. Patty sat back down, studying me. "So what's your plan now? You got somewhere to go?" The question stopped me cold. Go home? To my little house filled with memories of George? My house key was in my purse, but the thought of letting myself into that empty, lonely house made me shudder. Go back to their house? The thought was even more horrifying. The image of Kevin's angry face and Linda's cruel smile flashed in my mind. I couldn't face them again. Patty sighed, as if reading my thoughts. "I know. Tell you what, when my shift is over, you can come home with me for a few days, just until you figure things out." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a gratitude I couldn't put into words. I couldn't impose like that. "Don't be silly," she waved her hand. "We all get old. I just lost my own mother last year. Looking at you reminds me of her." And just like that, I was going home with Patty. But before we left, she took my hands, her eyes locking onto mine, serious and strong. "Listen to me, Rose," she said, using my name for the first time. "They treated you like trash. They threw you away. So you have two choices." She held up two fingers. "One, you can lie here, stay a victim, and rot like garbage in your own misery. Or two," she paused, emphasizing every word, "you can get up, dust yourself off, and show them they just threw away a treasure." Those words weren't a gentle comfort. They were like an electric shock, straight to my soul, reviving something that had been dormant for a long, long time. My self-respect. A treasure. Me? A 69-year-old woman, cast off by her own children? What was so valuable about me? But looking into Patty's steady eyes, I started to believe it. Maybe underneath all the ashes of disappointment and hurt, there was still a tiny spark left. The next morning, after a fitful night filled with nightmares, I woke up with a clear decision in my head. I wasn't going back to Cleveland. I wasn't going to give them the chance to hurt me again. I was going to start over. I had Patty take me to the bank. I withdrew all $7,000 from my savings account, money I had scrimped and saved my entire life, money I had intended to leave for Sam. But now, I was going to use it for myself. After that, we went to the bus station. "You're really going?" Patty asked. a little sadness in her voice. I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't just save my life, Patty. You saved my soul." As I sat on that bus, watching the familiar Cleveland skyline shrink in the window, a sense of liberation I had never known washed over me. For 69 years, I had lived for other people. For my parents, for my husband, for my son, and then for my grandson. The tears came again, but this time, they were tears of freedom. The woman abandoned on the highway died that night. From her ashes, someone else was being born. And this new woman, she wasn't going to live in fear. She was going to find her own treasure. The bus rolled south, leaving behind the gray buildings, the industrial smokestacks, and an entire lifetime. With every mile that passed, I felt the weight on my shoulders get a little bit lighter. I didn't look back. I only looked forward to where the sky seemed bluer and the air seemed cleaner. I had chosen Asheville, North Carolina, almost on a whim. I'd once seen a postcard of it in an old bookstore. The majestic Blue Ridge Mountains, the quaint houses nestled on the hillsides, and a little caption that read, "The Land of the Sky." It sounded poetic, and that's exactly what I needed. A little poetry in a life that had become harsh prose. When the bus pulled into the Asheville station, I stepped off and took a deep breath. The air here was different. It was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The mountains surrounded the city like a protective embrace. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe a real, deep, satisfying breath, not one crushed by invisible weights. With what little money I had left after the bus ticket, I found a small apartment in an older building, the kind of place they have for folks on a low income. It was just one bedroom with sparse furniture, and the mustard yellow paint was peeling in several spots. But it had one thing I fell in love with the moment I saw it. A little balcony that overlooked a lush shared courtyard. That was going to be my garden, the place where I would plant the seeds of my new life. Those first few weeks passed in a quiet blur. I spent my days walking, exploring this small but charming city. I wandered the cobblestone streets, peered into art galleries, and sat for hours in coffee shops, just watching the world go by. I was a nobody in a brand new place, and surprisingly, that felt incredibly freeing. No one knew who I was. No one could judge my past. I could be anyone I wanted to be. One morning, while sitting in a little coffee shop called The Roving Bean, I met Diane. She was about 68, with a stylishly cut mane of platinum hair, a vibrant red coat, and a pair of fashionable cat-eye glasses. She just radiated this confident, joyful energy, a stark contrast to the timid, withdrawn person I was back then. She struck up a conversation when she saw me engrossed in a real estate magazine. "House hunting?" she asked, her voice warm and a little curious. "Oh, not really," I answered awkwardly. Just looking." "I'm Diane," she said, holding out her hand. "Used to be a real estate agent, retired now, but you know, old habits die hard." I hesitantly shook her hand. "I'm Rosemary. It's a pleasure to meet you." Our conversation started there. Diane was a wonderful storyteller. She told me all about Asheville, its people, its history. She didn't ask much about my past, just accepted my presence as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Slowly, I began to open up. Diane became my first friend in this new land. One day, Diane invited me to a free seminar her old company was hosting, with the topic Investing and Home Buying for Retirement. I initially refused, feeling it had nothing to do with me. But Diane insisted, "Just come for the fun of it, Rose. You never know what you might learn. Besides, they have excellent pastries." And it was at that seemingly boring seminar that my life took a completely unexpected turn. I sat in the back row, quietly listening to a slick, handsome young agent named Chad go on and on about golden investment opportunities and dream condos. He showed slide after slide of modern, glamorous houses, accompanied by glowing descriptions. When he presented a lovely little house at a fairly reasonable price, many in the audience seemed very interested. But me, with the experience of a homemaker who had spent her entire life caring for a home, I noticed things that Chad had conveniently overlooked. During the Q&A session, an elderly couple asked about the living costs for that particular house. Chad answered smoothly, rattling off estimated numbers, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. I timidly raised my hand. Chad seemed a bit surprised to see a plainly dressed old woman like me wanting to speak. "Yes, ma'am?" I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Excuse me, Chad," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I just have a few small observations. I noticed that house has a large bank of windows facing west. Here in North Carolina, the summers are blistering hot. That means the electric bill for the air conditioning would be sky high, especially for a retiree on a fixed income." The room went silent. Chad blinked, looking a little flustered. I continued, my voice gaining confidence. "And that beautiful balcony, it doesn't have a cover. One might imagine enjoying afternoon tea out there, but the reality is, during the rainy season or on a scorching sunny day, it's practically useless. Furthermore, the only bathroom is on the upper floor. For an older person, having to climb stairs every time you need the restroom, especially in the middle of the night, would be inconvenient and downright dangerous." I sat down, my face flushed. I had said too much. I had embarrassed that young agent. Diane turned to look at me, her eyes wide, not with annoyance, but with unconcealed astonishment. After the seminar, while everyone was enjoying the pastries, Diane pulled me aside. "Rose, my God," she exclaimed, gripping my arm. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You just pointed out the fatal flaws in a deal Chad has been working on for a month. And you were absolutely, 100% correct." I'm sorry. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "Sorry? Rose, that was the most brilliant thing I've ever seen." She laughed. "You have an eye that not every agent has. You don't see walls and floors. You see how people will live in a space. That's a gift, Rose, a rare and valuable gift." The next day, Diane showed up at my apartment with a proposition. "I have an idea," she said, sitting down on my worn-out sofa. "I still have my license. I have the connections, the knowledge of the laws and the paperwork. But I'm tired of chasing numbers. You, on the other hand, you have insight. You have life experience. You know what people our age truly need in a home." She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "Let's team up, Rose. I'll handle the logistics, the contracts. You'll be the consultant, the heart of the operation. We won't just sell houses. We'll help people find a real home for their golden years." The idea was crazy. Me? A real estate consultant? I was just a housewife, a woman who had been thrown away by her own family. I can't, Diane. I don't have the experience, no degrees or anything." "Your experience is your life," Diane said firmly. "Your degree is in living. Rose, just try it. What have we got to lose?" And so, I agreed. Our little business, Asheville Senior Homes, started modestly. Our office was our regular table at the Roving Bean. Our first clients were that elderly couple from the seminar. They had been on the verge of buying that west-facing house. I didn't talk to them about numbers or interest rates. I asked them about their habits. "Do you like to garden? Do you need space for a small woodworking shop? Do you have grandchildren who visit often?" Based on their answers, Diane and I searched. We didn't look for a perfect house. We looked for the right house, and we found it. A small, single-story home with a sunny garden for her and a spacious garage for him. When they walked into that house, I saw their eyes light up. They were home. Word gets around. The retiree community in Asheville isn't huge, and soon we had more clients than we knew what to do with. I wasn't just a consultant. I was a friend, a listener. I helped them envision their new lives. I showed them how to arrange furniture to prevent falls, suggested the best farmers markets, and introduced them to community clubs. For the first time in my life, I was earning my own income. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough for me to live comfortably, and more importantly, it was money I had earned myself. I moved into a nicer apartment. I bought myself new clothes, not cheap things from a department store, but the elegant, colorful dresses I had always dreamed of. I got a stylish short haircut. Every morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman, a confident, independent woman with a sparkle of joy in her eyes. I still thought about Kevin and Sam. The ache of missing my grandson would sometimes grip my heart, but the pain was beginning to fade. I was no longer their victim. I was busy building my own life. I had found my new garden, not just on my apartment balcony, but in this city, in my work, in my friendship with Diane, and most importantly, within my new self. I was no longer Rosemary Miller, the abandoned mother. I was now Rose, the real estate consultant, the woman who had risen from her own ashes. And I knew, somewhere deep down, that my story wasn't over. The storm may have passed, but its aftershocks were still rippling, and sooner or later they would find their way back to me. While I was planting the first seeds of my new life in Asheville, back in Cleveland, in that modern cold house I once considered my son's home, invisible cracks had already begun to spread. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I tried not to think about them, tried to bury their images in a forgotten corner of my mind. But like the roots of a tree silently breaking the foundation of a house, my absence, and more importantly, the way I left, had become a slow-acting poison, eating away at their family. It was only months later, through Kevin's broken words in a hospital room, that I was able to piece together the whole picture of that time. A gray picture, stained with guilt and disintegration. To the outside world, the Miller family was still a model of success. Kevin was a talented engineer with a rising career. Linda was a sharp project manager, always perfectly put together. Their house was in an upscale neighborhood, and their son, Sam, went to the best school. But that was just the shell. Inside, that house was suffocating in a heavy silence. They had reported me missing to the police. A dry, emotionless report. Mrs. Rosemary Miller, 69, suffering from mild forgetfulness, may have wandered off after a family argument. They lied. Not just to cover their tracks, but because they themselves couldn't face the monstrous truth of what they had done. A family argument, such a gentle phrase for an act so cruel as to abandon your own mother on the side of a highway. In those first few days, they probably felt a sick sense of relief. No more old-fashioned grandmother hovering around. No more unscientific meals. Linda had complete control over her son's environment. Sam's meals were measured down to the last calorie. His schedule was planned to the minute: piano, French lessons, coding classes for kids. Their home ran like a perfectly programmed machine. But that machine had no heart. Slowly, my absence began to leave vacuums that no perfect plan could fill. There was no longer the smell of freshly baked cookies on a Saturday afternoon. No more gentle voice telling fairy tales before bed. No more warm arms for Sam to run into whenever he fell or felt sad. Kevin was the first to feel it. He started to become irritable and withdrawn. The pressure at work was mounting, and when he came home, he found no peace. Instead, he found a sterilely clean house and a terrifying silence. Their dinners were no longer about conversation, but about Linda's instructions for Sam and clipped, functional exchanges between husband and wife. "How was work today?" Linda would ask, her eyes never leaving her salad. "Same old," Kevin would reply, scrolling through his phone. They avoided talking about me. My name became taboo, but that silence was more damning than any accusation. My ghost lingered in every corner of the house, in the empty armchair where I used to sit and knit, in the faint scent of the lavender soap I loved, which Linda still hadn't thrown out, and most painfully, in Sam's eyes. The boy began to change. From a cheerful, lively child, he became quiet and anxious. He would often sit alone in his room, talking to his toys. Sometimes, Linda would catch him whispering to the empty armchair, "Grandma, where are you?" One evening, as Linda was preparing one of her scientific meals of steamed chicken breast and broccoli, Sam pushed his plate away. "I don't want this," he said, his voice stubborn. "Sam, eat. I told you, it's good for you," Linda said patiently. "I want Grandma's stew," the boy shouted, his eyes welling up with tears. "I hate broccoli." Linda froze. It was the first time Sam had ever defied her so forcefully. "Grandma is gone," she said, her voice turning cold. "And we don't eat that unhealthy food anymore." "Is it because she's gone that I can't have it?" Sam sobbed. "Was it because I didn't eat her stew on my birthday that she got mad and left?" The innocent question was a knife straight to Linda's heart. She was speechless. The guilt she had been so desperately suppressing suddenly surged. What had she done? In her pride, in her obsession with perfection, she had not only hurt her mother-in-law, but she was now carving a deep psychological scar into her own young son. That night, for the first time in months, they fought about me. "Did you hear what he said?" Linda asked Kevin, her voice trembling. "He thinks it's his fault." "My God, Kevin, what have we done?" Kevin, who had been drowning in his own guilty silence for so long, finally exploded. "What have I done? What have we done? It was you, always your books, your theories. You turned this house into a laboratory and our son into an experiment." "And what about you?" Linda screamed back, tears streaming down her face. "You slapped her. You threw her out of the car like a dog. You were the one who drove away." Vicious accusations flew back and forth in their luxurious living room. They were no longer the perfect couple. They were two accomplices trying to shift the blame to absolve themselves of their own crushing guilt. The fight ended with Kevin slamming the door and storming out, leaving Linda sobbing alone in the cold, empty house. Things only got worse. At school, Sam started getting into fights. His teacher called, saying he had trouble focusing and was prone to angry outbursts. They had to take him to a child psychologist. The psychologist, after a few sessions, delivered a gentle but damning verdict. The boy is experiencing a profound sense of loss. He's missing a stable, emotional connection with an elder figure, a model of unconditional love and acceptance. It seems he misses his grandmother very much. Those words were a sentence for Kevin and Linda. They had tried to give their son the best of everything material, but had robbed him of the most precious thing of all, the simple, warm love of a grandmother. The guilt and remorse were no longer a lurking ghost. They had become a tangible monster, sitting squarely in the middle of their living room, devouring their marriage, their son's spirit, and their own peace of mind. One Sunday afternoon, in a desperate search for some sliver of hope, Kevin decided to clean out the storage shed, where some of my old things were kept. He was hoping to find a diary, a letter, anything that might tell him where I had gone. He didn't find that, but he found something else. In an old cardboard box, under faded photo albums, was a small wooden box. Inside were his old essays from elementary school. On the top was a neatly clipped paper with the words, "First Prize, School-Wide Essay Contest." The title was, "My Mother." He sank to the dusty floor of the shed and began to read. He read about the mother who stayed up all night to mend his torn school uniform, the mother who carried him on her back through a blizzard to get to the hospital, the mother whose hands were rough but gave the warmest hugs in the world. Tears began to fall down the 45-year-old man's face. He cried silently, his shoulders shaking. How could the boy who wrote those loving words and the man who slapped that same mother's face be the same person? He had lost his way, lost in the pressures of life, in his wife's ambitions, and in the ghost of his own uncontrollable anger. Kevin and Linda tried to find me. They hired a private investigator. They called every distant relative they could think of, but it was no use. It was as if I had vanished into thin air. They had no idea that while they were sinking in the wreckage they had created, far away, the woman they had thrown away was not just surviving. She was being reborn, and that rebirth would soon come back to change their world forever. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, more than a year after that fateful night, the final wall of Kevin's carefully constructed world came crashing down. The Cleveland sky that day was unusually clear and blue, a cruel contrast to the storm that was silently brewing in his life. Kevin got to the office earlier than usual. The engineering firm where he had dedicated the last 15 years was in the process of restructuring, a pretty corporate word for the brutal reality of mass layoffs. The atmosphere in the office had been tense for weeks. People walked softly, spoke in whispers, and avoided eye contact, as if afraid the wrong glance might land them on the chopping block. Kevin had reassured himself that he would be safe. He was a good engineer, a capable project manager. He had brought in several lucrative contracts for the company. But when he saw the email from HR with the subject line, "Urgent Meeting," a cold dread washed over him. He walked into the conference room, a cold glass box. The CEO and the head of HR were already there. Their faces were grim, and they avoided his gaze. Kevin didn't need to hear all the empty platitudes about the difficult economic climate or the painful decisions. He only needed to hear the words, "We're very sorry," to know that 15 years of his dedication had just been erased in 15 minutes. He left the office like a sleepwalker, clutching a cardboard box of his personal belongings, the only remnants of a career he had once been so proud of. The April wind was brisk, but he didn't feel the cold. Inside, he was just numb. He had worked himself to the bone, missed family dinners, Sacrificed time with his son, all for what? To be thrown away without a second thought, just like the way he had. The thought flashed through his mind, and he immediately suppressed it. He didn't dare follow it. When Kevin got home, the house was eerily quiet. Linda was sitting on the living room sofa, her head in her hands. In front of her on the glass coffee table was a letter from the bank. Kevin didn't need to read it to know what it said. It was the second blow, the knockout punch. A few months earlier, in a desperate attempt to get rich quick and fill the void in his life, Kevin had sunk a large portion of their family savings into a risky cryptocurrency venture a friend had recommended. He had hidden it from Linda. He had told himself that this one score would solve all their problems. He could work less, spend more time with Sam, and maybe, just maybe, the weight of his guilt would lessen. But the bubble had burst. The entire investment was gone. "I know," Linda said, her voice hoarse without looking up. "I saw the statement from the bank. How could you, Kevin? How could you hide this from me?" Kevin stood frozen in the doorway, the cardboard box suddenly feeling immensely heavy. He had no fight left in him, no energy for excuses. He just quietly set the box down. "I was laid off today," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Linda's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror. The anger in them was instantly replaced by sheer panic. Jobless, savings gone, 2 disasters in one day. The fortress they had so carefully built, mortared with success, careers, and material possessions, had just crumbled to dust. "What are we going to do now?" Linda stammered, her once perfect face now crumpled with fear. "The mortgage, Sam's tuition. My God, Kevin, we're going to lose everything." They sat in silence for a long time, surrounded by the ruins of their life. It was in that moment of absolute desperation that a thought flickered in Kevin's mind. A bitter, shameful thought. But it was their only glimmer of hope. "There's still one thing," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Linda looked at him, confused. "Mom's house," Kevin said, swallowing hard. "We could sell it. It's not big, but it's in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The money, it could keep us afloat for a while." The little house on Oakwood Street, the one George and I had saved our whole lives to buy, the house where Kevin grew up, filled with laughter and tears. To them, it had just been an old, outdated house. They had suggested many times that I sell it and move into a modern retirement community, but I had always refused. It wasn't just a house. It was the last sanctuary of my memories. Linda hesitated at first. The thought of touching the last remaining thing of the mother-in-law she had treated so cruelly filled her with a vague sense of disgust. But desperation is a powerful motivator. The fear of losing her own luxurious home, of losing the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, was stronger than anything else. "Are you sure?" she asked. "The paperwork, do we have the right to sell it?" "Of course," Kevin said firmly, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "She's been missing for over a year. Legally, we're the only heirs. I'll talk to the lawyer." The decision was made, one born of selfishness and fear. They didn't think of me, of how I would feel if I were alive and came back. They only thought of saving themselves. They told themselves it was the last resort, something they had to do. They began to clear out my house. It was a painful process, especially for Kevin. Every object sparked a memory. The worn armchair where I used to read to him. The pencil marks on the doorframe, charting his height year after year. In my closet, he found the sweater he had given me for Christmas, the last one before everything fell apart. It still smelled faintly of lavender. He cried. A 45-year-old man, broken and defeated, sat on the floor of his childhood home and wept like a child. But tears couldn't change their reality. They needed the money, and they believed that this house, my final legacy, was their lifeline. They gathered all the necessary paperwork and made an appointment with their family lawyer, an old man who had known Kevin since he was a boy. They walked into the lawyer's office, feeling heavy-hearted but hopeful. They had hit rock bottom, and this was the only way up. They had no idea they hadn't truly hit bottom yet. The real bottom was still waiting for them, and there, in the darkness of the truth, they would have to confront a legacy they could never have imagined. A legacy designed not to save them but to judge them. Mr. Henderson's office, the old family lawyer's, was on the top floor of a stately old building in downtown Cleveland. It wasn't sleek and modern like the new law firms, but possessed a quiet, old-world dignity. The walls were paneled with dark oak, covered with framed degrees and certificates that had yellowed with time. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco. It was a place of secrets and wills, of beginnings and endings. Kevin and Linda sat in 2 leather armchairs across from Mr. Henderson's massive desk. They had placed a thick file on the desk, containing my house's deed and the police report of my disappearance. Kevin's heart pounded. This was their final gamble. Mr. Henderson, a man with a full head of white hair and tortoiseshell glasses, examined the file carefully. He turned each page slowly, his sharp eyes scanning every line. He had known Kevin since he was a little tow-headed boy running around this very office, back when George and I came in to sign the first papers for the house. He looked at Kevin, then at Linda, his gaze a mixture of compassion and stern judgment. "I was so sorry to hear about Rosemary," he said, his voice deep and warm. "She was a wonderful woman. I always admired her strength." Kevin bowed his head, unable to meet the lawyer's eyes. "We were too, sir. We tried everything to find her, but—" "I understand." Mr. Henderson cut him off, seeming unwilling to hear any more excuses. He pushed his glasses up his nose and refocused on the documents. "So, you wish to sell the house on Oakwood Street?" "Yes, sir," Linda spoke up, trying to keep her voice calm and professional. "We're facing some financial difficulties. This is our only option right now." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly but said nothing. He continued to read, his lips pressed into a thin line. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Kevin could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. Each second stretched into an eternity. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses and polished them with a small cloth. He let out a long, weary sigh. "I'm afraid there's a problem, children," he said, his tone shifting. "A problem?" Kevin asked, his stomach clenching. "Is there something wrong with the paperwork?" "The paperwork is perfectly in order," Mr. Henderson replied. "The problem lies elsewhere." He stood up and walked over to a steel filing cabinet in the corner. He opened a drawer, shuffled through some files, and pulled out another folder, this one older and thicker. He placed it on the desk next to Kevin and Linda's file. The cover read, "The Miller Family Trust." "Do you two know anything about this?" he asked. Kevin and Linda looked at each other, confused. "A trust? I've never heard Mom or Dad talk about it," Kevin stammered. "Your father wasn't a man who liked to boast, Mr. Henderson said, a sad smile touching his lips. George was a quiet man, but his thoughts ran deep, especially when it came to protecting Rosemary. He opened the old file. Inside were pages of carefully typed documents, with my signature and George's at the bottom of each one. Years ago, after George received a small inheritance from his uncle, he came to see me. He was worried, Mr. Henderson recounted, worried about the future. He said that Rosemary was a woman with a kind heart, sometimes too kind, and that she could be easily taken advantage of. He wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to him, Rosemary would always have a place to live, a secure life. Mr. Henderson paused, looking directly at Kevin. "And he was worried about you too, Kevin. He saw your temper, something he said you inherited from him. He was afraid that one day, in a moment of lost control, you might make a terrible mistake." Kevin felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. "So," the lawyer continued, his voice now taking on the gravity of a judge delivering a sentence, "we established the Miller Family Trust. It is an irrevocable trust. All assets, including the house on Oakwood Street and a small investment portfolio, were transferred into this trust." "Irrevocable. What does that mean?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. "It means that once it's established, its terms cannot be changed or canceled by anyone, not even the person who created it," Mr. Henderson explained clearly. "It was designed to withstand any and all eventualities." He flipped to the last page and pointed to an underlined paragraph. "And here is the most important clause. According to the will and the trust documents, upon the death of George Miller, the sole trustee, sole beneficiary, and the person with absolute and total authority over all assets within the trust, is Mrs. Rosemary Miller." The air was sucked out of the room. But she's missing," Kevin tried to argue, his voice weak and desperate. It's been over a year, legally. Legally, Mr. Henderson interrupted, his voice becoming sharp. She is only considered missing. She has not been declared dead. And until that happens, or until she herself appears and signs the papers, no one, not even her own son, has the right to touch a single penny or a single brick of this trust. He leaned back, looking squarely into Kevin and Linda's stunned faces. To put it simply, you cannot sell that house. You have no right. The only person with the power to do so is the mother you reported as missing. The truth hit them like a death sentence. It wasn't just a legal issue. It was a painful revelation. Kevin's stern, quiet father, the man from whom he had always felt a distance, had seen the future. He had foreseen his son's weakness, foreseen a day when he might hurt the very woman he loved most, and he had built an unbreachable legal fortress to protect her, a fortress that not even Kevin could get past. George's legacy was not a gift for his son, it was a shield for his wife. Kevin and Linda left the lawyer's office in a state of numb shock. Their last hope had been extinguished. They hadn't just lost their money and their jobs, they had now lost the final illusion of their place in their own family. They were not heirs. They were children who had been disinherited by their own deceased father. On the drive home, Linda began to cry, not for the money, but for the awful truth that had just crashed down on them. "He knew," she sobbed. "Your father knew. He knew what kind of man you were. He didn't trust you." Kevin didn't answer. He just gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Linda's words bored deep into the raw wound of his pride. He wasn't just a failure in his career, a terrible husband, a disloyal son. Now, in the eyes of his dead father, he was a threat. They had hit rock bottom. But they didn't know that at the bottom of that pit, a new search was about to begin. Not a search for money or an escape, a search for Rosemary. Not to sell her house anymore, but to face her, to face the truth, and maybe, just maybe, to beg for a salvation they knew they didn't deserve. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and now they had to find the person who held the key to their fate. Their search for me was no longer a half-hearted effort driven by a vague sense of remorse. Now, it was a mandate for survival. They rehired the private investigator, this time with the last of the money they could borrow. They provided every detail, every little scrap of information they could remember. And finally, after weeks of tense searching, the investigator called back. He had found me, not through official records, but through an unexpected source, a small article in a local Asheville magazine about new faces in retirement real estate. Accompanying it was a photograph. The photo showed me and Diane standing in front of a charming little house, holding a sold sign. I looked different. My short hair was stylishly coiffed, a turquoise blouse complemented my skin, and most importantly, there was my smile. A genuine, radiant smile, with no hint of strain. It was not the smile of a victim. It was the smile of a victor. They drove nonstop from Cleveland to Asheville. That drive, as Kevin later recounted, was a silent journey. They didn't say a word to each other, just the steady hum of the engine and the chaotic thoughts in their own heads. What would they say? How would they plead? The woman in that photograph was no longer the meek mother and mother-in-law they had known. They found our small office, Asheville Senior Homes, tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't a flashy office, but a warm, inviting space decorated with landscape paintings and potted green plants. I was sitting at my desk, talking to a client on the phone, when the door opened. Kevin and Linda walked in. For a second, my heart stopped. The blood ran cold in my veins. All the sounds around me faded away. There were only the two faces I had tried to forget for nearly 2 years. They looked terrible. Kevin was noticeably thinner, with stubble on his face and dark circles under his eyes from sleeplessness and worry. Linda, who had always been so perfectly put together, was pale and weary, her makeup unable to hide the shadows beneath her eyes. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck. I calmly finished my phone call, though my hands were trembling under the desk. I gave Diane, who was sitting at the next desk, a small signal that everything was okay. "Hello, you two," I said, my voice steadier and colder than I could have imagined. "Mom," Kevin breathed, his voice hoarse. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if an invisible wall stood between us. They told me everything. They told me about the job loss, the failed investment, the risk of losing their home. They told me about the trust, about George's legacy. They didn't try to hide or make excuses. They simply laid out the naked truth, a confession from two people at the end of their rope. I listened without interrupting. My face was a mask of stone. Inside, a storm was raging. One part of me felt a bitter sense of satisfaction. Justice, finally. But another part, the part of a mother that never truly dies, felt a sharp pang of pain at seeing my son so broken and desperate. When they had finished, Kevin knelt, right there on the floor of my office. "Mom, I'm begging you," he sobbed, the tears he'd held back for the entire trip now streaming down his face. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I'm a monster. But please, save my family. Save Sam." Linda was crying too, but she didn't kneel. She just stood there, head bowed, trembling. I looked down at them. The power had completely, utterly reversed. I now held their fate in my hands. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang in the air. "No," I said. A single word, cold and final. Kevin looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. I stood up, walked around my desk, and stood before him. "That night when you slapped me, you gave up your right to be my son. When you," I turned to Linda, "belittled me, you gave up your right to be my daughter-in-law. This trust was your father's protection, the protection his own son failed to provide. It was created to shield me from your mistakes. And now, it is doing exactly what it was designed to do." I turned away, toward the window. "You can see yourselves out. I have work to do." I didn't watch them leave. I only heard Kevin's heavy footsteps and Linda's stifled sobs. When the door clicked shut, my legs finally gave out. I sank into my chair, my whole body shaking. I had done it. I had said no. But why did victory taste so much like ashes? A few days later, fate intervened once again. The stress of the confrontation, the emotions I had suppressed for so long, took their toll on my aging body. One afternoon while I was home alone, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and my left arm started to go numb. Everything in front of me blurred. I managed to grab my phone and dial Diane's emergency number before I collapsed to the floor. I woke up in a sterile white hospital room, the distinct smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils. The doctor said I'd had a mild stroke. Thankfully, Diane had gotten there in time and called an ambulance. I had escaped the Grim Reaper's grasp. Diane was there by my side. "Rose, I did something, and I don't know if it was right or wrong," she said, her face full of guilt. "In your emergency contacts, I saw Kevin's number. I called him." "You did what?" I gasped, trying to sit up. "I'm sorry, Rose, but I thought he needed to know. He's still your son after all." And he came. In the middle of the night, the hospital room door burst open. Kevin rushed in, looking even worse than the last time I'd seen him. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from worry and a sleepless night of driving. He didn't say a word, just rushed to my bedside looking at me, then at the machines I was hooked up to. The panic in his eyes was unmistakable. He hadn't come for money. He had come because he was genuinely terrified of losing me. In the days that followed, he and Linda took turns staying by my bedside. Kevin handled all the hospital bills, speaking with the doctors with a surprising clarity, and patiently spoon-fed me soup. Linda quietly did the thankless tasks, changing the flowers in the vase, doing my laundry, reading to me when I couldn't sleep. Their care wasn't forced. It came from a place of sincere remorse and worry. One late night, when it was just the two of us, Kevin sat by my bed, holding my frail hand. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "When I got the call from Diane, I thought I had lost you for good. I drove like a madman. I only had one thought. If anything happened to you, I would never be able to forgive myself." He bowed his head, and his hot tears fell onto my hand. "I saw my father's face in the mirror that night, Mom. I had become the monster I'd spent my whole life hating. I swore I would never be like him, but I failed. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for everything." I said nothing, just gently stroked the back of his hand with my thumb. A few days later, it was Linda's turn. She came alone, bringing a bowl of homemade porridge. As I ate, she sat beside me in silence. Then, suddenly, she began to cry. Not sobbing, but silent, painful tears. "Mother," she said, her voice trembling, "I was so wrong. I was so arrogant, so selfish. I always thought my way was the right way. I didn't respect you or your experience." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't until you were gone that I understood. The house was empty. Sam was always sad. I tried to make everything perfect, but I failed. I realized that your concern wasn't interference. It was love, a love I didn't know how to appreciate." She bowed her head. "I don't dare ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just ask for the chance to continue to be a daughter to you." I looked at my daughter-in-law, the woman who had once scorned me, now broken before me. I could see the sincerity in her pain. I slowly put the bowl down. I didn't say a word. I just weakly reached out and took her trembling hand. Her hand was ice cold. I gave it a gentle squeeze, a wordless acceptance, a silent pact. Forgiveness might still be a long road, but at least we had taken the first step together. After I was discharged from the hospital, I summoned them both to my apartment. I still looked frail, but my voice was firm. I placed a set of signed papers on the table. "I will sign the papers on one condition," I said. "6 months of family therapy, both of you. You can't miss a single session." They looked at each other, then nodded in unison. "Thank you, Mom," Kevin said, his voice full of gratitude. "Don't thank me," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "Do this for yourselves and for Sam. Prove to me that you deserve this second chance." Those 6 months were not easy. I knew that from Kevin's weekly phone calls. At first, his voice was defensive and reluctant. He talked about the therapy sessions as if they were a chore. He and Linda had to drag out the darkest corners of their relationship and of themselves into the light. They had to face the demons of their pride, insecurity, and fear. They had to learn to listen, not to argue, but to understand. Gradually, I noticed a change in Kevin's voice. It became deeper, calmer. He began to share more about what he was learning, not like a homework assignment, but like a true discovery. "The therapist said today that I'm always trying to control everything, Mom," he said in one call. "Because my childhood with Dad, it was so chaotic. I'm afraid of chaos. And I turned that fear into anger and took it out on the people I love most." It was the first time he had ever acknowledged the shadow George had cast over his life. When the 6 months were up, their house in Cleveland was saved. The money from the sale of my house, after expenses, helped them pay off their bank debt and gave them a small amount of capital to start over. Kevin had found a new job at a smaller, less stressful company that gave him more time with his family. Linda had changed too. She gave up some of her major projects to be home earlier, to truly be with her son, not just supervise him. They drove to Asheville, this time not in desperation or guilt, but with a sense of peace I had never seen in them. They came to my apartment, no longer as beggars, but as people who had fulfilled their side of the bargain. My apartment was filled with sunlight. I had planted geraniums on the balcony, and they were in full, vibrant red bloom. "You look so much healthier, Mom," Kevin said, his smile no longer forced. "I feel so much healthier," I replied, smiling back. We sat and talked for a long time. They told me about the changes in their lives, about how Sam was starting to laugh more, about how they had started having no phone dinners. Then, the moment I knew was coming finally arrived. Linda took a deep breath. "Mother," she began, her voice soft and respectful. "We came here not just to thank you, but also to ask you to come home with us." Kevin continued. "We've redecorated the guest room. We bought a new bed, one that's good for your back. Sam, he misses you so much. He asks every day when Grandma is coming home." They looked at me, their eyes filled with hope. A year ago, this was all I had ever wanted, to be needed, to be asked back. But now, hearing those words, I felt only a strange sense of peace. I looked out at the balcony, where the geraniums were proudly showing off their colors in the Sunday I had planted them. I had cared for them. This was my garden. I turned back to them and smiled. A real smile, without a trace of bitterness. "I see your sincerity. I believe that you have truly changed, and my heart, in its own way, has healed." I paused, choosing my words carefully. But the woman who was left on the highway died that night. She died with her innocence and her fear. I was reborn here, in Asheville. I looked around my small but cozy apartment. This is my home. Freedom is my life. I can't go back. Disappointment was clear on their faces. But it didn't last long. It was replaced by an understanding, a mature acceptance. They looked at each other. There was a flicker of sadness, but then Kevin nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "If you won't come home to us," he said, his voice no longer that of a demanding child, but of a man who had learned his lesson, "then we will come to you." And that was the beginning of the new order in our family. Our relationship was not rebuilt on the old foundation. It was built on something entirely new, a foundation of respect, effort, and choice. Every other week, sometimes every weekend, that black SUV would make the drive from Cleveland to Asheville. It was no longer the car of betrayal, but the car of healing. They didn't come to take care of me out of obligation. They came to share their lives with me. Sam would run into my arms, chattering about school. He and I would tend to the plants on the balcony together. He loved watering and picking bugs off Grandma Rose's flowers. Linda and I would cook together. But now, she no longer criticized my food. Instead, she would ask, "Mom, can you teach me how to make that stew? But maybe we can use a little less butter, okay?" And I would smile and say, "Of course, dear." We found a balance between tradition and modern life, between love and science. Kevin would often just sit with me on the porch. We didn't talk about big, important things. Sometimes we would just sit in silence, watching the distant mountains. But in that silence, there was a connection deeper than any words. He was my son again, but in a different way. A more equal, more mature way. I continued my work with Diane. I still had my own friends, my own life. I was no longer a satellite orbiting my son's family. I was my own planet, with my own light and my own gravity. And they, now, were the ones drawn to that light. I am 72 years old now. I am sitting in my favorite armchair on my porch in Asheville. The sun is setting over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The journal I started writing in my first days here is open on my lap. In the yard, Sam, now almost 9, is carefully watering the sunflowers we planted in the spring. People ask me if I have forgiven them. Such a simple question for such a complex emotion. Forgiveness isn't a switch you can just flip on or off. It isn't about erasing the past like wiping a slate clean. The past is still there, etched like the grain in wood. Forgiveness, I've realized, is like gardening. You have to pull out the weeds of bitterness every day, because they will always try to grow back. You have to water the soil of your soul with understanding, not just for them, but for yourself. Forgiveness, in the end, wasn't a gift I gave them. It was the peace I gave myself. I used to think the sweetest revenge would be to see them suffer, to see them taste what I had endured. But I was wrong. The sweetest revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was forcing them to get back up on their own. It wasn't witnessing their pain, but becoming the catalyst for their own healing. I didn't take their house away. In a strange way, I gave them back a family. A real family, built on truth and scars, not on the veneer of perfection. I used to define myself by my roles: a wife, a mother, a grandmother. My value seemed to depend on how useful I was to others. That storm, as cruel as it was, washed all those old definitions away. It forced me to face myself, naked and alone. And in that solitude, I had to find my intrinsic worth, the value of simply being Rosemary. George's trust, I first thought it was just financial protection, but it wasn't. It was a legacy of foresight. He gave me the most precious thing of all, the power to choose, the power to say no, and ultimately, the power to set myself free. Now, the love in my family is no longer a bond of obligation, a default setting. It has become a bridge that my children must make the effort to cross every other weekend to come to me. And strangely, it is on that bridge of effort and choice that we have found each other again, closer than ever before. Sam runs up to me, placing a small, bright sunflower in my hand. Its petals are still dotted with glistening drops of water. "Isn't it beautiful, Grandma?" he asks, his eyes clear and bright. I smile, a smile of contentment and freedom. I hold the flower gently in my hand. It is, my love. It's absolutely perfect.